Hello, everyone.
12 or 15
Welcome to the Soldiers Memorial Building tonight. On behalf of the Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War, McKinley Camp number 9, we're happy to have you here. This is our regular night. We've opened it up for a speaker tonight and invited the public in. At this time, I'd like to say that there are two handouts here on the table, limited copies of each, but you might be able to get one. One is events that are happening through the Lebanon Historical Society that I believe Lee Hammond's going to tell you about in just a minute. And the other one is Civil War happenings in the area. New London, Claremont, various
Civil War,
various things. And so there's a few of those. So if anybody's interested in those, come on up and help yourself to these. And if you run out of the one that's the Civil War events in the area, talk to this lady right here that's holding her hand up, and maybe she can get your email address and send you a copy of it. Tonight we have the distinct pleasure of having a really good speaker and a knowledgeable person who's done a lot of historical research in the personage of Steve Allen. And tonight he's going to portray Jesse Dewey, who was a Lebanon resident who had a lot of Civil War experience and was in the Second New Hampshire, was wounded at Gettysburg, and had various things happen to his family and everything. And I'm going to let Steve go into that in great detail to tell us the story about them and their family. But at this time, I'm going to introduce Lee and have him just talk about his events. And then once Lee's done, Steve, you can take over.
It's all spelled out for you. Good evening, welcome. Just wanted to let you know that one thing the Historical Society is trying to do is get people to remember things while they can still remember them. So we had one gathering of reminiscences of the 1940s, 50s, a few months back, and we decided maybe we should focus a little bit. So I'm going to focus with the help of people that can make it to the Senior Center on November 7th, all written down. We're just going to sit around in a circle and try to recall what we know and remember of the railroad. What went on, what were our feelings, how much did a ticket cost, and where do we go? And some anecdotes. So if you had some experiences then and can get away in the late morning, lunch is served there right afterwards. You can compare notes with your old friends. And then in January 8th, Jerry Danielle, who's spoken here before, retired professor from Dartmouth, is going to talk about the New Hampshire's role in the War of 1812, which had some very interesting twists. And all he would do to sort of entice me was we came that far from seceding from the Union over that. And we'll find out more. And then in February 22nd, to celebrate George Washington's birthday on a Sunday afternoon, if you're not skiing, you might like to come over to Kilton Library and learn about New Hampshire's ratification of the U.S. Constitution. And he picked out a very specific day. It had to be on February 22nd. And again, we came that close, maybe to not ratifying the Constitution. So, invite you to come and join us if you can. It'd be great.
Okay, first question. How many people have relatives from Lebanon that served in the Civil War? There are no Deweys in the group. Good. Now, why am I doing Mr. Dewey, Jesse? It's sort of you need to know what's going on. I'm not sure if I chose him to do or if he chose me to do him. And let me explain. Last year I had to do a talk, or I didn't have to do, I had volunteered to do a talk on Lebanon at Gettysburg. And a few months or a couple of months before, Now, it started actually a year before. I had received some letters on the internet from one of our friends who does a lot of research. And the letters were written in The Girl I Left Behind Me by Marquis Haynes. He had done 60 copies, and this was copy 45. And all the letters he sent home from the Second New Hampshire Company I, his girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, saved all of them, and they were compiled together and then distributed to his friends. So I had received that and had read that well over a year to 2 years ago when I received it. It was some of the best material I had written or read at that time. Then I had an event where my office was in the back of the fire station. I was doing public health for the region, and they had a fire over by the cemetery, a grass fire going up the hill. And the trucks happened to be out, so they were looking for some assistance, so they said, "Steve, could you go over and help us?" So as I'm over there, standing in the cemetery on School Street, trying to prevent this fire from coming up over, I happened to glance over, and what am I standing next to is the gravesite of Jesse Dewey, and it says Company I, Second New Hampshire. Now, I had not put any connection to Company I of Marquis Haynes and Jesse Dewey. So I said, that would be great. He's a Lebanon person. I will do him in my talk. So as I started going through the letters, I find out that not only is Mr. Haynes in the same company, Jesse and him are friends, and he talks about Jesse all through his letters off and on. So that's what I did for my presentation. Now for the rest of the story. After the presentation, I was at one of the local grocery stores, and a friend of mine came up to me and said, "Steve, are you still interested in the Civil War? Do you do stuff with it?" And I said, "Well, yes, it's a life of passion. I've been doing this for many years. I'm cleaning out my father's boxes and stuff after he passed away, cleaning out the house, and we found boxes of letters and diaries." I said, "Really?" And he says, "I'm wondering if you would like to look at them so you can tell me what they're worth or whatever." So I said, "Do you know who they are?" And who do you think it was? Jesse Dewey's letters and 3 diaries from the Civil War. So I'm not a person who believes in ghosts, and I'm not a person who believes in all of this, but you have to think about that for a second. So what I will be doing tonight is I will be portraying Jesse for most of the presentation. There will be one part of the presentation where we will go upstairs at the end of the presentation because I would like you to see something else with this. So I am going to try to go back and portray Jesse with the dignity that he deserves, and so I will transform. And good evening. I'm glad that you've asked me to come back. As Lebanon is my town, I have been in the town for quite a few years now. I was born in October 2nd, 1842 in Hanover, and 2 weeks after I was born, my father passed away, and my mother, Sarah, remarried and moved to Lebanon and has lived in Lebanon since I was 2 weeks born. Because of my stepfather, because of the complications, I was really brought up by many of my family members around the area. I spent a couple of terms over at KUA, and after KUA and I turned 18, I decided that I would go to Manchester to work in the mills where I could make some real money. So I started working in the machine shops at the mills. In April, when Fort Sumter was fired upon, and we were asked by Abraham Lincoln for 300,000 soldiers, I immediately went over and signed up, and I was the 20th person in the state to sign to go into the service. I was trying to get into the 1st New Hampshire, but there was such a glut of people signing up that they had already filled up in that short period of time. By the time my information had gotten to the State House, the 1st New Hampshire was full. It was a 3-month regiment, and they were going to be going to the front, and I was very desperate because 3 months and the war will be over and I will have missed it. But it turned out that they were forming also at the same time the 2nd New Hampshire. And it was a 3-year regiment, and I decided that I would go into the 2nd New Hampshire, and I was, on April 22nd, 1861, I was mustered into the service with the 2nd New Hampshire. Now my brother, John Dewey, John had moved out west a few years before the war started. He was 24 years old. I was 18. He was my big brother. He had moved out west, and when the war broke out, he joined the 16th Iowa Regiment. He happened to be in one of the regiments that as soon as they signed up, as soon as they put on their uniform, they were put on a boat and sent down the Tennessee River to Grant's army to join them at Pittsburgh Landing. Lo and behold, as they were getting off the transport, in the background they could hear firing, cannons going. The Battle of Shiloh had begun. Most of my brother's friends and troops that were with him had never even loaded their gun before they were told to load, and they were sent to the front of the line to take on the Confederates. So that's a little bit about my brother, who was out west and served in the west for the war. In the 2nd New Hampshire, the last time I came and talked about the 2nd New Hampshire, I brought us all the way up to Gettysburg and through Gettysburg. At Gettysburg, we had 352 men who were still with the regiment. We had started, we were the 2nd Regiment. We had fought all the way from the Battle of Bull Run, the first Battle of Bull Run, all the way up through almost all the campaigns with the Army of the Potomac. We were in the 3rd Corps. We went to the Battle of Gettysburg. We were in the Peach Orchard, and we were part of Humphrey's division, and we were hit on the 2nd day. We were in the Peach Orchard when Barksdale's brigade made their famous charge and swept us off the field. There were over 50% casualties in our regiment. 177 of the boys were casualties from that battle, leaving us with 177 men in the regiment. And we had started with over 1,000 men 2 years before. Now, as we were marching, we were put the 3rd Corps. The 3rd Corps had been pretty well decimated at the battle. And we were put in line, and we went after Lee after the battle. And we started marching, chasing him back to Virginia, trying to engage him before he got across. Because of the fact that we had been taking so many casualties, and we were such a small unit, we were detached from the 3rd Corps, detached from the Army of the Potomac, and sent with prisoners to take them to a new prison that was going to be built at Lookout Point, or Point Lookout, in Maryland. And so that's where we ended up going after the Battle of Gettysburg. So what was it like when we were there? Well, first of all, the commanding general was General Marston, and he happened to be our commanding officer of the 2nd New Hampshire when we first went in. He was our colonel, and he had been promoted up through, and now a lot of the New Hampshire regiments, not only did the 2nd New Hampshire go to Point Lookout, but also the 12th and a few of the other regiments that had been decimated also. So we were there together to guard these prisoners. And I was an orderly sergeant. Being an orderly sergeant, I had the advantage of having a little bit of seniority with the boys, with the lads, and I got my own tent. So as the Sibleys were going up, they were putting up Sibleys, there would be 4 or 5 guys in the other tents, 4 or 5 of the lads in the tent, and I got to be by myself with a little bit of privacy. So there was some advantage to being a first sergeant. Now Marquis Haynes wrote to his wife all the time, and I have a few of his letters that I'd like to read you because he is very eloquent in his writing. And Martin wrote home in August 1st, 1863, he said, "Talking of comfort, I'm sitting on the shade of a big pine tree, within 2 rods of the shore of the Chesapeake Bay. A delicious breeze blowing from the waters and the waves rolling on the beach. The first thing this morning when reveille was blown, nearly every man in the regiment made a dash for the water for a plunge and a swim. This was a fashionable summer resort before the war. The waters abound with crabs, and the boys have already got to catching them. And when I was up to camp this noon, one of the boys had a kettle full on boiling. We had a ration of salt horse given to us today, which is corned beef, and this is the first that we have had since leaving Washington to go up to Gettysburg and back. It seems like an old friend now getting that for us. Additional prisoners had been coming to the prison. At the beginning, there was only a couple hundred prisoners, and what we would do is